Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Today's edition presents a roundup of the latest developments in the finding of a flying disc.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago. The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet. In the meantime, General Ramey describes the object as being of flimsy construction, almost like a box kite. He says that it was so battered that he was unable to determine whether it had a disc form, and he does not indicate its size. Ramey says that so far as can be determined, no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil. Other Army officials say that further information indicates that the object had a diameter of about 20 to 25 feet, and that nothing in the apparent construction indicated any capacity for speed, and that there was no evidence of a power plant. The disc also appeared too flimsy to carry a man. Now, back to Taylor Grant in New York.
I welcome this kind of examination.
We came,
and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
A new world order. New world order.
we saw.
If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe.
Always talk to you like they're the law.
And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
He died. He died.
But that's a wicked woman.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
You can keep it. Period. 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 They are the focus of evil in the modern world. It's a catastrophe.
Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome.
This is the Midnight Rider News Podcast. Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm St. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, the court historians, and textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we have episode 038, Stanton Friedman on Roswell, Majestic-12, and UFOlogy. Nuclear physicist and ufologist Stanton Friedman will join us next in the midnight hour. But first, we must clean the castle. We're on Facebook at Midnight Rider News Show, so please like, please follow, and please share. Our Twitter is MWN_ST Patrick. We are LinkedIn at ST Patrick, that's S.Patrick. Our email is midnightridernews@gmail.com, and the free archives, as always, can be found at midnightridernews.com. Hey, I'm proud to announce that you'll now be able to hear select episodes on YouTube. So go to YouTube and search for Midnight Rider News Show. Then please subscribe to our channel. You can also go to midnightridernews.com for more details. We'll be right back with Stanton Friedman. Roswell, Area 51 and Bob Lazar, MJ-12, JFK, Art Bell, 9/11, Disclosure, and what's really happening on the moon. The great John Lear joined us to talk about all of this and more.
Hi, this is John Lear. If you want to know how my experiences took me to the alternative side of history and how they both planted me in the middle of the Bob Lazar story, download episode 11 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
nuclear physicist and lecturer Stanton T. Friedman received his Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science degrees in physics from the University of Chicago in 1955 and 1956. He was employed for 14 years as a nuclear physicist by such companies as GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet, General Nucleonics, and McDonnell Douglas, working in such highly advanced, classified, and eventually canceled programs as nuclear aircraft, fission and fusion rockets, and various compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. He became interested in UFOs in 1958, and since 1967 he's lectured about them at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in 50 U.S. states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, in addition to various nuclear consulting efforts. He's published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared on hundreds of radio and television programs, including 3 appearances on Larry King Live. He is the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident and co-authored Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. He's also published Top Secret / Magic, his controversial book about the Majestic-12 group. Stanton was presented with a Lifetime UFO Achievement Award in Leeds, England in 2002 by UFO Magazine of the UK. He is the co-author with Kathleen Martin of the 2007 book Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. His book Flying Saucers and Science was published in June 2008 and is in its 3rd printing. His newest book, also co-authored with Kathleen Martin, is Science Was Wrong. And we're so happy to have him here tonight. Here is Stanton Friedman. How are you tonight, Stanton?
I'm doing very well in beautiful downtown Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, east of Maine.
Fantastic, and thank you very much for being on the show.
My pleasure. I enjoy doing shows. It's easy from my house.
Now, Stan, you're one of the world's leading authorities on Roswell. Your work, Crash at Corona, is one of the definitive studies of this case. Now, the incident outside of Roswell, New Mexico, is a great place to begin when discussing modern ufology. So let's do that. Now, we've never really had someone on who could really explain in detail the story of what happened there. So tonight, we'd like you to tell us about it. We'd like you to tell us about Roswell. What happened, who were the major characters, and what were the responses from the various military branches and governmental agencies?
Well, I must take credit for being the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident. I wasn't there in 1947. I was only 13 that year.
Right.
But, and I found out about it strictly by luck, if you will. I was doing interviews at the home of Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I was speaking at the university that night, and I was supposed to do 3 interviews at the local big television station in 1978. And I'd done the first 2, and the 3rd reporter was nowhere to be found. This is before cell phones were everywhere. And I'm talking to the station manager, and out of the blue, he says, you know, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. Brilliant investigator that I am. I said, who's he? And his answer changed my life. He handled wreckage of one of those saucers you're interested in when he was in the military. What? You know, this was totally out of the blue. What do you know about him? Well, he lives in Houma, Louisiana. That didn't tell me anything. I didn't know where Houma was. I was there later to talk to Jesse. It turns out he was the intelligence officer for the 509th Composite Bomb Group. Now, that just happened to be the most elite military group in the United States. And why do I say that? Back then, in 47, because they're the only guys who had access to atomic bombs. They dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then a couple more in Operation Crossroads a couple of years later. So they all had high-level security clearances. This is a very special group of people. So this wasn't a bunch of GIs with nothing better to do than make up stories. And the Cold War was beginning. So everything went well with the lecture that day. The next morning, I was at the airport to go on to someplace else, but I was there early, and I called information in Houma, Louisiana. And I should mention for the younger generation that back then, if you wanted a phone number, you didn't go on your computer. Who had computers? you called information. And they knew a lot about the town you were calling about and stuff. That was handy. So I got a number for Jesse A. Marcel in Houma, Louisiana. And I talked to him. And people say, well, why did he talk to you? I thought this was all hush-hush. Well, his name was in newspapers, I found out later, all over the place. The Roswell story got big play for 2 days. Army captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region, said one headline. And General says just a captured weather balloon. So you didn't hear anything about it. It's mentioned like 3 times between when it happened in 47 and when I talked to Jesse about it in 78. That's a long period of sort of nothing happening about the story. But when I talked to Jesse, it was clear I was impressed with. He had been a major, and I told him that I had a security clearance for 14 years, which helped a little, I think. And, I understand security and stuff like that. And I shared my information with a guy named William Moore, and we found newspaper articles. And in the next year, we talked to 62 people in conjunction with the Roswell incident. Now, you get lucky. I have to admit it. It's not that I'm such a brilliant investigator. You're in the right place at the right time. When I say lucky, I looked in Editor and Publisher, which lists all the newspapers around, and Roswell has a newspaper. I didn't know that. Small town at that time, 25,000. And I called the Roswell Daily Record, and yes, can we help you? I said, well, I've got some articles here. It says that a guy named Walter Hout put out a story, press officer, about a flying saucer back. Before I could finish the sentence, this is where I got lucky. His wife works here. What? So that was a lucky one. I talked to his wife. They're both gone now. And then I talked to Walter. And he was not only the public information officer, but equally important, he flew 20 missions as a bombardier navigator during World War II. And he was such a good one that he was chosen to drop the instrument package over one of those 2 nuclear weapons tests in 1946. And you pick your best people to do that, because what's the point of doing the test? We didn't have a lot of nuclear weapons at that time, you understand. And people may not realize the Russians didn't test their first one until 1949. And General Groves, who was head of the Manhattan Project to build atomic bombs, he was asked in 48, how long will it be before the Russians get their first nuclear test? Well, he went on about Russia was hit very hard by the war and so forth. He thought at least 8 years. Well, it happens. It was 1 year later that the Russians tested their first one. And so that's what upset the whole business about the Cold War, because not only did they test an Elan, but the common mythology was, well, the Russians don't have any way to deliver it. How could they attack us? Look how far it is. They don't have any big airplanes. Well, it turns out we'd left the B-29, which carried our atomic bombs to drop on Japan, in Russia, slightly damaged. And they went and built a whole bunch of, I'll call them Japanese copies of, you don't hear that expression much anymore, of the B-29. And so all of a sudden, not only, and they flew them and so that they were seen by the media people, not only did they have a weapon 1 year later, we didn't even have radar around the United States because, after all, where was the threat at that time, And so this upset the apple cart considerably. Now, I should also add something else. The first case that got of UFO sighting that got a lot of attention was June 24th, 1947. That was the Kenneth Arnold sighting near Mount Rainier in Washington State. He was a pilot, and he spotted, broad daylight, 9 objects zipping around between the mountains. and he couldn't see a tail on them. And he timed their flight between two peaks. And son of a gun, those darn things were going 1,500 miles an hour. Now, the top speed for airplanes was 700 miles an hour. We hadn't flown supersonic yet at that time. So this was clearly something out of the ordinary. And the Roswell incident happened 2 weeks later. First week of July, and as a matter of fact, that's when I'll be there for their annual festival. For people who want an interesting event, there are 3 days. This year it's the 6th, 7th, and 8th of July. 6th, 7th, and 8th of July. Lots of speakers, lots of events. Roswell, last year they had over 7,000 people for that weekend. For the year, now for people who say, well, nobody cares about saucers. Last year, the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell was visited by over 200,000 people. And what's surprising about that is Roswell is in the middle of nowhere. It's not on the way to anywhere. It's 200 miles from Albuquerque, 200 miles from Amarillo, 200 miles from El Paso. If you're in Roswell, it's because you want to be there. You're not just stopping by while you're going someplace else. So for people who think, well, nobody cares about these things, that's not true. And yes, they do have costume contests because people bring their kids. It's vacation time, etc. Anyway, the Roswell story, we worked on it. At the end of the first year of effort, we found 60 people. By the end of the second year, we found 32 more. And now, as a matter of fact, you can even get a DVD, Recollections of Roswell. It's got testimony from 27 witnesses, all but one of whom are now dead. Not surprising, 70 years later. But the thing about Roswell, it has significance in several different directions. One of them is it told the government that there's something really incredible going on here, and we don't know whether these guys are bad guys or good guys or what they have in mind for us. It raised the worries, serious worries. And also, maybe they want to work with the Chinese because the bodies that were found in that one were small. And the Chinese are small, so maybe there's a relationship here. Who knows? But they also had technology beyond anything that we or anybody else on this planet, as far as we knew, had. Certainly, we would not want to give out any data that could help our potential enemies develop new technology to use against us. How could we tell the world what we found out if the Russians and Chinese and so forth don't tell what they have found out? It's sort of portrayed, especially when you don't know what these guys have in mind. I mean, maybe the Galactic Federation has got rules. When you have idiots out there and earthlings, I use that term not casually, but let's face it, in World War II, we nice guy earthlings killed 50 million of our own kind. Think about that for a minute. 50 million. We destroyed 1,700 cities. And since the war, incidentally, we've exploded, and I've asked people, how many atom bombs do you think we've exploded on this planet? 50, 100 maybe. 2,000! Now, the importance of the atom bombs is not only that they're a good way to destroy cities and kill people and stuff like that, if there is a good way to do that, but that means you know something about fission and fusion. The two kinds of atom bombs, so fission, uranium, and so forth, and then fusion. You put small atoms together and it releases an enormous amount of energy. And it gives you the means to go and bother your neighbors. That's not a trivial point, in other words. When aliens find out that the idiots on Earth have access to fission and fusion devices, that is something they would be concerned about. And there have been plenty of sightings near nuclear facilities and, indicating somebody's very interested. Let me give you an idea of the difference it makes to go nuclear, not just because I'm a nuclear physicist, but a big bomb in World War II, say 1944, was a 10-ton blockbuster. released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. Wow! And it took a big V-29 to carry it. Well, the first atomic bomb, fission device, the next year, 1945, that's what ended the war, released the energy of over 15,000 tons of dynamite. Not 10, 15,000. And then in 1952, the first hydrogen bomb, H-bomb, if you will. That's a fusion device. Now, fusion, for those who don't know it, is the major source of energy throughout the universe. All the stars, they're not burning gas. That's nuclear fusion going on. The first fusion bomb, the first H-bomb, 1952, released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. And the Russians dropped one a few years later. Tsar Bomba, it was called. Way up in Siberia, where there's a lot of land and not many people, released the energy of 57 million tons of TNT. So if you stand aside from that and you say, what about those guys over on Earth? They're crazy. They're going to bother us. We got to watch out for them. They're not being nice. I mean, I don't know whether they know it, but the military budget on the planet this year, a cool $1 trillion. That's a commitment to destruction. Is that a good way to put that?
I believe that's a perfect way to put that, actually.
So what I'm saying here, it's not because I'm a nuclear physicist that I want to make mention of nuclear propulsion. I worked on fission nuclear reactor. We tested one. Well, there are 3 outfits that tested one on the ground. Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab, 1968. Ours produced 1,100 megawatts of energy. To give you something to compare it to, what's Hoover Dam? I was trying to think of which big dam. Hoover Dam produces 2,000 megawatts, and Hoover Dam is enormous. The nuclear rocket was less than 8 feet in diameter. And so, a fusion rocket, I worked on a study of fusion propulsion for deep space travel in 1962. And the bottom line was, if you want to go, all it takes is dough, lots of money. Now, why do I say that? Well, let me give you an example. I worked on at the Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department of General Electric between 1956 and 59. In 1958, our budget was $100 million, and we employed 3,400 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. We're not talking about 6 professors and 12 grad students. This was a big project, and $100 million was a lot of money in 1958. So when people say, well, if we know how to go, why don't we build one? Because it takes a lot of dough. And what's our objective, And maybe it's not such a good idea to take a fusion device out there. Maybe they'll come back at us. So what I'm saying is Roswell told us, A, that there were aliens, B, that they had technology, the ability to maneuver incredibly, to move straight up, straight down, silently, rapidly make right-angle turns, et cetera, which we don't have the capability of doing, certainly didn't at that time. So we got to watch out. And then we also got to worry about, hey, the Russians and the Chinese and others are going to try to, if they capture any of these guys, they're going to try to build their own. So it's not a trivial question. It's not a little interesting sidelight off to the corner, who cares, what difference does it make? There were about 1,000 sightings after that Kenneth Arnold case, and after the month after Roswell, all over the place. All of a sudden, flying saucers everywhere. And, I presume, maybe wrongly, that every advanced civilization is first going to try to figure out how its star produces its energy. Because there's a lot going on up there. Now, we thought, 100 years ago, we thought stars produce their energy by burning gas, And then when it turns out to be nuclear fusion, we figured that out in 1938. And everywhere, fusion. That changes the stakes of the game. Maybe we can build our own kind of thing, and propulsion and so forth. And so it's kind of funny to me that when people say, "Oh, you can't get here from there," look how big a rocket would have to be, and all this kind of stuff. That's baloney. They haven't done their homework. I mentioned I worked on nuclear fission rocket reactor propulsion systems. Aerojet General built one, 1,000 megawatts, and the big baby, Los Alamos National Laboratory, which employs about 6,000 people down there in New Mexico. Not terribly far from Roswell. But Los Alamos' nuclear rocket reactor propulsion system, Phoebus it was called, the energy level, production level was 4,000 megawatts. And the exhaust temperature, liquid hydrogen in, very, very cold, close to absolute zero, comes out at 4,000 degrees. So all three groups successfully tested these systems. And, of course, then their program was canceled. What can I say? Incidentally, for people who aren't aware of it, the nuclear navy makes use of nuclear energy. We have submarines which in World War II could stay under for 24 hours. You need air for the diesel engines and so forth. The first nuclear submarine to went around the world underwater, 1960. Not a day, but weeks and weeks. They also have nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. And they carry maybe 75 little airplanes, but they can operate without refueling for 18 years. Think about that for a minute. If you're a ship captain, no gas stations needed, folks, or tankers, or whatever you want to call it. So it changes the rules of the game. It changes everything that's important when you realize they may carry, we have little airplanes on board those carriers. They can operate for, 2 hours without refueling? But the ships can go 18 years. That's quite remarkable. And I'm not talking for people who think he's making this up. No, I'm not making it up. You can check. So the world has changed drastically. And we had a leader like Admiral Rickover who put together the nuclear navy. And we haven't had anybody like that to push the nuclear propulsion, deep space, all that sort of stuff. But I presume the aliens have had somebody like that.
Maybe so. Now, if I remember correctly about Roswell in my reading, the USAF, the United States Air Force, didn't really dispute the story until...
the next day.
Right, the next day. What happened there?
Well, Army captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. That's the headline. The next day, General says it's radar weather gadget, and that took care of it. When people were looking at the wreckage and finding out what the heck is this stuff, suddenly we had to get that off the books. Let the world think we made a mistake. And Jesse Marcel couldn't say anything. The press, there are pictures that showed up in the newspapers. With Jesse, they replaced the real wreckage. Well, let me back up a little bit. He found out about this. There was a rancher named Mac Brazel who heard a strange sound in the night, early July, went out the next day, and found an area, half a mile by a quarter of a mile, with this crazy wreckage all over the place. This is in the desert now, New Mexico. The reason our first atomic bomb, you realize, was tested in New Mexico. White Sands Missile Range, which is the largest military base in the country, was firing rockets all over the place. You can only do this where there aren't many people. You don't test your nuclear bombs in populated areas. And certainly don't fire rockets, which sometimes go where you don't want them to go, believe it or not. Some of our rockets went down to Mexico. They weren't supposed to.
No.
So the rancher, Mac Brazel. He finds all this junk, and it's very lightweight material. He didn't know what the heck it was. It was spread over a large area, and what his concern, he had a sheep ranch, and sheep will eat almost anything. And the last thing he needed was for a sheep to be eating this very thin, very lightweight, very strong metallic material. And so the rancher is in the town of Corona. And, I know there's a Corona beer. There used to be a Toyota Corona. I don't know if there's any connections with any of these things. But he brought in some of the wreckage, and he hadn't heard. He didn't have a radio. Didn't have electricity, really. He hadn't heard about the saucer sightings a week or two before, see. But some of the guys at the bar in Corona, the general store, and they told him, hey, there's a reward out for any of this stuff. He didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, really. So you ought to see the sheriff. So on Sunday, I guess it was the 6th of July, he went to the town of Corona, went to the sheriff's department, and the sheriff told him he should go to the base, Roswell Army Airfield. Later it was Walker Air Force Base, same place. And so that's how he comes to the base, and he sees Jesse Marcel was the duty officer there. And Jesse told me when I spoke to him that there must have been a mid-air explosion for 2 reasons. There was so much of this stuff spread out over such a large area, and there was no crater. He served in World War II. He knew when an airplane crashes, boy, you got a big hole in the ground, because there's fuel on board and it'll explode. So this was really weird. And Jesse told me he thought there had to be a mid-air explosion. But he couldn't say anything when he was told by his boss, Colonel Blanchard, base commander. Now, I've had people say, oh, he was just a take-charge kind of guy. A loose cannon was the expression I heard. Well, I'll tell you something. He went on to be a 4-star general and was Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force when he died of a massive heart attack on duty at the Pentagon. And he knew that about atomic bombs because on his way up to being Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, he had under his control thousands of nuclear warheads. We built a lot after 47. So the government trusted his judgment. He got 4 more promotions, including to 4-star general and Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. You don't, every promotion when you're past a colonel has to be approved by Congress. So we presume that they don't, he was a West Pointer, of course, they don't appoint idiots to these jobs. I think that's a fair assumption. So this whole story gets very important because people didn't understand what difference does it make. So there was a flying saucer, big deal. They're probably mistaken. And let me give you an example of what the government did to, how shall I put this, camouflage the truth? Lie through their teeth? Take your choice. The biggest study ever done for the United States Air Force was Project Blue Book, Special Report number 14. And it was published in the mid-50s. And the work was done by Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, a very well-respected research and development company, but their connection with Air Force was classified. So the press release that was put out didn't say who did the work. Didn't give the title of the report. If they'd said Special Report 14, somebody would have said, what do you mean? What happened to 1 through 13? We haven't heard anything about that. But in this widespread distribution press release, we find the following statement by the Secretary of the Air Force. We're not talking about some secretary now, doing the typing. We're talking about the Secretary of the Air Force. He's quoted, Donald Quarles, "On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available." Well, that's pretty straightforward, except it's a total lie. I had a copy of the report. I had stumbled across it, almost literally, at the University of California, Berkeley Library. It hadn't been mentioned in the 10 books that I'd read by that time, you understand. And the unknowns weren't 3%. They were 21.5%. And there's no way that you can say, well, that's 3 rounded off.
No, not even close.
Isn't 3 approximately 21.5? They also did a cross-comparison between the unknowns and the knowns, looking at things like apparent size, color, shape, speed, the characteristics that are observed by the witnesses. They found the probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. They did a quality evaluation. The better the quality of the sighting, the background, the observer, the duration of observation, the details, the more likely to be unexplainable. Exactly what you'd expect if there were really something different and strange. So that report, which none of the press had a copy of the thing, and they accepted what the Secretary of the Air Force said. I mean, we just fought a huge war. Of course you believe the Secretary of the Air Force, don't you? Governments don't lie, do they? Well, sorry. So that is typical. It's not the only example by far. But, and if you talk to the nasty, noisy negativists, it turns out they never looked at Special Report number 14. 4 basic rules for UFO debunkers. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble, and nobody will know the difference anyway. So I've debated some of the skeptics, and there's a big event coming up, April the 8th, in Vancouver, British Columbia. There will be an in-person debate between myself and Dr. Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society. And, the chips will fall where they may. It'll be a formal debate. Now, he and I debated on Coast to Coast Radio about 10 years ago or so. And they took a vote of the listeners, and as it happens, I got 80% of the vote. He got 20%. Well, he hadn't done his homework. Now, I'm sure he's going to be more prepared this time, but I bet he still hasn't done his homework, because he's head of the Skeptic Society, and their position is very clear. There's nothing to flying saucers. I just read one thing. He said it's a commitment to religion. Don't ask me to explain that. I can't. But what I'm saying is there's an awful lot of data out there, and you won't hear about it from the nasty, noisy negativists, the ancient academics, the fossilized physicists who say this is baloney. It's really incredible. There have been over a dozen PhD theses done about UFOs. An excellent one was about press coverage of the subject and the failure of the press to do its homework, to talk to the right people. It's a complicated subject. And I must say this, though. I'm old enough to say that I have watched things change. And these days, our attitude about, aliens, who we are, how important we are, et cetera, has changed. Let me give you an example. We used to think, Frank Drake thought there might be 8,000 places that could send us radio signals. Ain't nobody coming here. That's the dogma, But 8,000 places in the galaxy. Now, thanks to the Kepler satellite, we know that there are about between 1 and 1.6 planets per star. Now, what does that mean? Well, within 100 light years of here, which is just down the street, really, Well, in comparison, Andromeda's, a million light years away. So, now, that means that within 100 light years, there's between 10,000 and 16,000 planets. And, we used to think, well, it's our solar system. This is the only planet that's got life and water and oxygen and all those good things. Now when you say that there's 16,000, let's say, within 100 light years, that keeps us from being very special, doesn't it? And I'm not saying they all have life. Maybe it's only 1 in 10. It's still a heck of a lot of places. Also, we have the strange impression, we act as though every other star has no neighbor closer than 4.3 light years, which is what our nearest neighbor's distance is. Not so. Many stars have nearest neighboring stars that are less than a light year away. In the Betty and Barney Hill case, described in my book with Kathleen Marden, Betty Hill's niece, the book has captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. Betty saw a star map, I'll call it that, a three-dimensional one. And a lot of work, a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish built more than 20 different three-dimensional models of our local neighborhood. And she had to copy out all the numbers for the locations of the stars. They wouldn't let her take the books out of the library. And the base stars turn out to be Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli in the constellation of Reticulum, which means the net. Now, those two are only 39.3 light years from here, but from each other, they're an eighth of a light year apart. So they're 30 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over. We're out in the boonies. These guys got next-door neighbors. So that changes the situation. And I submit that the closer your nearest neighbor, the more likely you are to be in a hurry to find out how to get between the stars, because you want to steal what's over there, or at least keep them from stealing what you've got, so you better find out about it.
Well, right, and I would guess that the Roswell incident had the military establishment of Washington, D.C. absolutely abuzz with rumor, conjecture, and maybe most importantly, a very high level of interest.
Of course.
One of the political aftershocks of Roswell was the creation of Operation Majestic-12, or as we now know it, MJ-12. Before I ask you about seeing the documents in 1984, however, I'd like to ask you to explain Majestic-12 to us. What was it? Why was it created? And who was involved?
Well, the name has been changed, undoubtedly. When code names get out, you change them. Originally, as a result of Roswell, toward the end of 1947, President Truman established Operation Majestic-12, accountable only to the president. And we got a memo, a document, if you will, in which they list the members of this group. It's like 8 pages, and they're all outstanding people, and it's high security. And my colleague Bill Moore got a copy in the mail, a roll of film in the mail, and you print the film, and son of a gun, what is this? And then since that, there were dozens more documents. I'm saying 3 are genuine. And it's perfectly normal. Talk to anybody in intelligence work. If good stuff gets out, you flood the market with crap. And you hope it rubs off. On the good stuff, oh, well, this one's phony and that one's phony, so that's probably phony too. Don't worry about it. Nothing to do, And there are people who think that nobody can keep secrets from them. And I know one guy who asked a bunch of guys, he had a security clearance, and he had grown to be a colonel. He couldn't find anybody who knew anything about Majestic-12, so there must not have been one. He still hasn't answered the question that I posed to him. How often, John, did you give out information to people, classified information, to people who had no clearance and no need to know? I never got an answer to that question. Look, I worked under security. Those are the 2 things, the need to know and the appropriate clearance. Because you have a top secret clearance does not give you access to everything that's top secret. only the stuff that you have a need to know for. And so, we tend to forget that. Well, they had a clearance. I get people who tell me that the government can't keep secrets. Oh, really? Let me give you an example. The U-2 flights, were spy planes. We were illegally flying over the Soviet Union. And we knew they'd be able to shoot them down at some point in time. So we decided to work, and they did, decided to work on a spy satellite. The Corona spy satellite, as it happens. I mentioned it before. And they had 12 failures in a row, in secret. We're talking lots of bucks here for those. The 13th one got more data on Soviet military installations than all the U-2 flights that had preceded. Because, a satellite goes round and round and round, and I love the way they got their data back. They deorbited the reels of film. They were taking pictures up there, and they had a way to deorbit them over the Pacific, and an airplane would come along and put out the big net and catch it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Honest. Now, you'd think we'd make a big noise about that. Hey, look what we did. 30 years that program was classified. And we spent a lot of bucks. Like I say, 12 failures tells you something, And so there were quite a few Corona spy satellites that went up. But, I mean, there's an example now. We didn't release the information about that for good reason. We didn't want anybody to know what we knew. We didn't. Another example of a highly classified program was the Enigma machine. In World War II, for the young people out there, we developed techniques for reading Germany and Japan's classified mail, that really listening to it on the radio and stuff like that. And it was extraordinarily important. It's nice to know when where the other guy is sailing his ships, when he's going to be bombing you and stuff like that. Do you think we said, hey, look what we did, guys? Not even at the end of the war. That was kept secret for 25 years. The reason was straightforward. Other people were using those same machines. And we were reading their mail, too, and listening to their secret messages. So, can secrets be kept? You're darn right they can be kept. Do people goof once in a while? Sure they do. So what? The best baseball hitters get paid a lot of money for getting a hit a third of the time. 2/3 of the time they don't get a hit, but they get paid a lot of money for the third that they do. And it's kind of like one of the nuclear things. We realize uranium is basically two isotopes, uranium-235 and uranium-238. Now, the one we want, the one that's fissionable, can sustain a nuclear chain reaction, is uranium-235. Well, only 0.7% of all the uranium atoms are 235. What did we do? We spent a lot of money to build a mile-long facility, a gaseous diffusion plant, to pump a uranium-based gas through tiny holes in nickel plate, and it's a mile-long facility. And because 235 is a little bit lighter, it moves a little faster when you're pumping. And so when you take it out from the end after the first pass, you run it through again, pretty soon you enrich it to 80 or 90%. Do you say, well, it's not worth doing, it's only 0.7%? You say, no, I got nuclear weapons, thank you much. It was worth the effort, So you got to focus on what's appropriate. Have some people compromised classified information? Of course they have. So what? Most have not. I'll tell you, once I had to be the carrier of my own classified slides for a presentation I was giving at a meeting of radiation shielding for nuclear airplanes. And the regular courier had already left. So security sits me down. They knew I had a clearance for the stuff, because I put the data together. Stan, let's see if you understand what's going on here. We need your itinerary. We need you to know that those slides are with you, not in a briefcase in the trunk of the car. They're with you. We need you to know that if the plane crashes, we don't care about you. We care about that classified material. And so they read you the Riot Act, kind of. I was so glad to get rid of that stuff you wouldn't believe. Well, and I don't blame them. It's just that I was getting more and more uncomfortable as they're making it look pretty bad.
No, you're exactly right. Being expendable is not good.
No, there's a target on my back. The alien's going to find out about me or something.
Exactly. So back to Operation Majestic-12. Who was on Operation Majestic-12? Who was involved? What were their roles? And how do you think they were chosen?
Well, they had to have this, how do I put it, special capabilities, the best of the best, intelligence background, stuff like that. And, for example, I mean, they were mostly 6 civilians and 6 military. Among the military people were General Nathan Twining. He went on to be Chief of Staff of the Air Force, succeeding General Hoyt Vandenberg, who had been Chief of Staff. Sidney Sowers was one of the people. He was a Navy guy, the first head of the CIA. Roscoe Hillencotter was a later head of the CIA. Walter Beadle Smith was Ike's Chief of Staff in Europe during World War II. Very important guy. One of the key people in Majestic-12 was Dr. Vannevar Bush. He was head of the Office of Research and Development of the military. Lloyd Berkner was a scientist, explorer, doctor, space leader. He was the executive director of the Joint Research and Development Board. Detlef Bronk was an aviation physiologist, Dr. Bronk. Dr. Bush had all kinds of roles, had been head of NACA, National Association for, I was going to say campus activities, that's another group, aeronautics research. It was succeeded by NASA. James Forrestal, first Secretary of Defense before they'd been Secretary of the Navy. Gordon Gray had been Undersecretary, then Secretary of the Army. Jerome Hunsaker was an aeronautical engineer, head of the NACA, an MIT guy. One of my favorites, Dr. Donald H. Menzel. He was chairman of the astronomy department at Harvard University. And well known as a debunker, wrote 3 anti-UFO books. How could he be part of a group?
Well, exactly. And you even wrote that the first time you saw Dr. Menzel included in the documents that you thought this must be a hoax.
Well, they certainly, how could he be? Here's a guy who's written 3 anti-UFO books. How could he be part of something that knew the inside story of this very important group? So I did a lot of research. I've been to 20 different archives. I believe in having facts in hand before putting mouth in gear. It keeps you from having people give you a very hard time. And I didn't like Menzel. I had one encounter with him. I was speaking at Harvard, and I called early in the day to invite him to my lecture. It was an engineering alumni group, and I had no idea how much publicity they'd given the talk. "Oh, I know all about you," he said. I gave him my name. I said, "Oh, you saw my congressional testimony next to yours? One of the best collections of data is 12 papers that were presented, one by me and one by Menzel, to congressional hearings." He said, "No, I've seen letters and memos about you. You can't be a scientist and believe in flying saucers," he said, and I laughed. He got angry. And I said, "Dr. Menzel, I didn't call to argue with you. I called out of courtesy. I'm speaking on your campus. I wanted to invite you to my lecture at 8 o'clock and such and such." Oh, well, of course I won't be there. But that didn't answer the question. What's he doing on this group? So I did a lot of looking. And I found out I had to get permission from 3 different people to see his papers at Harvard. He was long gone by the time I was doing this. And son of a gun, he was close to Jack Kennedy. They even had breakfast together. Kennedy was from the Boston area, and Harvard's there. And I found, once I got the permission, and I was looking at his papers at Harvard, son of a gun, there was a letter from him to Jack and they called each other by first names, telling them that there's one area where I may be able to be of assistance to you. This is after Jack had been elected president. I had a longer continuous association with the National Security Agency of anybody, 30 years. When we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more. National Security Agency? Donald Menzel? What is this? So I did a lot of digging, and it turned out he did classified work in World War II. He was a code breaker, among other things. NSA, National Security Agency. No such agency is the word, you understand. That's what NSA means. So there's Menzel telling Jack that he had all this time with the NSA, and had also some connections with the CIA. And if I hadn't gotten permission from all those people to see Menzel's papers, I wouldn't have known that. And it turns out that Vannevar Bush, who was one of the top people of this Majestic-12, he wrote a strong letter in defense of Menzel when Menzel had hearings where they were trying to take away his security clearance, which nobody knew about. They considered him a security clearance a risk because he visited an eclipse expedition in Siberia. Well, that makes him a spy, doesn't it? I'll tell you, when you read some of this stuff, it's almost laughable. But, so I think that's one of my most important contributions to this subject has been my findings about Menzel. I started off not liking the man, but I developed a great deal of respect for him because I respect somebody who's working for his country to do classified intelligence work, and that's what he was doing, although nobody knew about it. So that was a very important discovery because it opened up the whole picture. What kind of level are we talking about here? Well, you could recognize the activities of people like Dr. Vannevar Bush, Dr. Jerome Hunziker, and a whole bunch of people. The last guy of this group died just a few months before we got this roll of film in the mail. Somebody was paying attention. In other words, there was no way you could go talk to any of these guys. They were all dead.
Oh, absolutely. Now, let me ask you this. Do we know how interested Truman was in Roswell? Do we know how interested Ike was after Truman? And do we know how interested JFK was after both Truman and Eisenhower?
Well, no, we haven't seen any written material where Ike said, I think Roswell was an extremely important event, or that where JFK said that or anything like that. What we do know was that the Truman Forrestal memo establishing Operation Majestic-12 made it very clear that this was considered of extraordinary importance, not only because of the people who were on the committee, but because nothing was directly accountable to the president. And you don't find anything out there where any of these guys revealing classified information. Unfortunately, too many people in ufology are too lazy to go digging out stuff to find out who had what clearances, who knew what, and so forth. And I'm bound and determined. I was in high school debating, and there are a couple of rules. We won a state championship in Linden, New Jersey one year. There are a couple of rules. One is you never lie. Two is you've got to know both sides of the story, because sometimes you'll be on the pro side of the debate, sometimes you'll be on the negative side. So you've got to be equally adept. You've got to know all the arguments. Now, in normal life, normally you find people defending a position, but they don't give a darn about the other guy. You know? But I had to be very careful about that. It's just built into the system because of my debating background. So there's no question, if you look at the names of the people in the group and the positions they held in the government, like Vannevar Bush, he was the top dog in the scientific community for many years, no question about it. Served on the right committees. The president needed advice from him for stuff, clearances for almost everything. So the fact that there were people who you never would have thought, like Menzel, on such a committee, makes sense to me. This is very highly classified stuff. And people have to have the appropriate clearance. They have to know how to keep their mouths shut. And they have to be able to make a contribution at a very high level as to what the heck is going on here. And how about the Russians? What are they doing? And stuff like that. So I get people who seem to think that we put out a report telling everybody, look what we're doing and look what we've got.
Right, and it brings me to a question about Truman's Secretary of Defense, the first Secretary of Defense, actually, James Forrestal. The circumstances surrounding his death in May of 1949 are nothing short of bizarre. Yeah. He was checked into the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. They diagnosed him with exhaustion and some depression. He was on the 16th floor, and in the early morning hours, Forrestal, really wearing nothing but only the bottom half of his pajamas, apparently leapt from his window. He lands on the third floor roof, and then they find this sort of weird suicide note that may or may not have even been a note at all. And while many researchers still remain suspicious of this today, and what I want to know from you, Stanton, I want to know your thoughts on Forrestal's death, because the circumstances are suspiciously peculiar at best.
Well, yes, they are, but I should point out now, if you do enough research, you'll find out that he really was mentally ill at the time. His friends were very worried about him, and he was in the hospital because he needed help. He was the first Secretary of Defense, and he had problems. His wife drank too much, and there were things like that going on in his life. And I'll tell you, in World War II, you can't believe how successful he was at getting ships built. He was the Secretary of the Navy. And, you were competing with everybody for everything. How do you get ships built? Because the iron's going over there for the tanks, So it was, Forrestal was in the eye of the storm, so to speak, when he became first Secretary of Defense. And, the fact that he went out the window at the hospital, we've never really known what happened. Did somebody push him? We don't know. I do know that his friends were very concerned about him because he had been mentally distressed for some time, which is kind of tough when you're the Secretary of Defense, because you got access to an awful lot of stuff. So that's one of the mysteries here, and we don't have the straight scoop. I don't think anybody's really solved the problem. There's no doubt that he went out the window, but whether willingly, unwillingly, somebody was under assignment to take him out, I have no idea. Make a great play if you figured it out.
Stanton, take us back to 1984. How did the MJ-12 documents first come to your attention?
We got a roll of film in the mail. Bill Moore got, and it had one of the Truman Forrestal memo in it, and there were other documents that were showing up, and so we were trying to decide whether they're legitimate or not. And at first blush, for many of us, we can't say these are genuine. People laugh at us. There's nothing to support it, and so forth and so on. But that's why I dug in. I mean, I've got a book, Top Secret Magic, MAJIC, which is a story about the MJ-12 documents. Well, thank you. And so we got the documents. There were arguments within the field, and let me give you an example of the kind of things I had to deal with. At Bill Moore and Jamie Chandray, the three of us had worked together on this, were in Washington. They'd gotten some strange memos that suggested they go to Washington. And they find a memo from Bobby Cutler, who was Ike's national security advisor. This is years later. And to General Twining, who was a member of this group. What happens here is we try to figure out what's going on with these documents. The Cutler-Twining memo, Mr. Philip Klass, who was one of the noisiest of the negativists. He wrote books after Menzel. He was an aviation writer, for a senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology. Not a stupid guy, and he was based in Washington, so many people thought of him as the go-to man. You want a story about UFOs, go to Class. He knows there's nothing to it. And so the Cutler-Twining memo mentions, it's a brief memo, but it mentions Majestic. And so Phil Klass said, well, sorry, but that's a phony memo. Why is that, Phil? Well, because it's done in a large pica type. But the National Security Council, which is mentioned up above, only uses a small elite type. And here's 9 to prove it. They're all done in the elite type. And he writes me a letter and publicizes it, that I will give you $100 each for every genuine memo document using the same size and style type as it was used in the Cutler-Twining memo, up to a maximum of 10. You have 60 days. Well, as it turns out, he had never been to the Eisenhower Library. I've been to 20 archives. I've spent weeks at the Eisenhower Library. I immediately went to my files, and you can tell the difference. Pica type's big. Elite type is small. People did use typewriters back then. And they weren't electric either. I went to my files, and I immediately found 20 pages of pica type from the National Security Council. So I was going to the Eisenhower Library, and I went. I got a research grant from the Fund for UFO Research. I picked up 14 documents done in the same size and style type as the Cutler-Twining memo. And I duplicated them, Xeroxed them. No plug. They don't need to pay me. And I sent them to class with an invoice for $1,000. 10 was the limit, and I sent him 14. And he paid me. And he got madder than hell when I published a copy of his check. I got rid of the financial numbers on it in one place. So I was being a nice guy, you know. But he paid me and was very angry when I showed a copy of his check. And the point is that he hadn't done his homework. He'd never been to the Eisenhower Library. It sounds great. Well, I've got 9 documents done in elite type. But as it turns out, the Eisenhower Library had 250,000 pages of National Security Council material. I accused the NSC a great deal. So it's one of those, how can you jump to a conclusion? Because you got 9 out of 250,000? You think they were all done on the same typewriter? I mean, you know. But that's typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology. And I do mean pseudoscience, because they make claims which are not substantiated by the evidence.
You know, Stanton, I'm not really surprised by that, because we see that all the time. I mean, you know, those people that still believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, they just absolutely, I believe, don't know enough about the case and the details of the case. And the people who believe that FDR had no prior knowledge of Pearl Harbor also just simply don't know enough about the case. But when these documents appear in your hands or before your eyes, you had to believe that they were a hoax. You've seen so many hoaxes.
Well, there are hoaxes. And as I say, I showed that a number of documents were phony. Another false argument, incidentally, was the ranks. In one of these documents, it calls somebody an admiral, Hillenkoetter, who had been head of the CIA. Well, obviously the documents are fraud. He was only a rear admiral. Well, one of my trips to the Eisenhower Library, the staff secretary put out memos about meetings at the White House. And he listed at first, in his coverage for Ike, what agreements were reached, who was there, who said what, that sort of thing. He put out stuff, and he said the attendees, and he called himself General, I forget what his name was at the moment, but anyway, it doesn't matter. And he was not a full general. He was only a brigadier general. And when he lists the attendees for all of them, he used a generic rank. It was standard practice, in other words, to call somebody general, even if he was only a brigadier general or a lieutenant general or a major general and not a 4-star. Admiral, rear admiral, you still call him admiral. But when the man who wrote these memos, like staff secretary, he signed it, then he said brigadier general with a list of attendees. Now, there was standard action to use generic ranks. But that's one of those things that the noisy negativists glommed onto without doing their homework. And I asked 2 different archivists, Truman and Eisenhower Libraries, about this. And they said, standard practice. And I looked, I had a book written by Eisenhower, Mandate for Change, I guess it was. And there are several examples in there where he used a generic rank. If it's good enough for Eisenhower, it's good enough for me.
And that's true. But how do we know that all documents are A, true, and B, mistake-free?
Well, I check with authorities whenever I can. Archivists are very helpful. And I get straight answers from them. And they're the experts. If they tell me, well, that was standard practice then, they did it all the time, who am I to argue with them, So it isn't. Now, remember, sometimes there's a difference between a document you find at an archive and something that comes in the mail, and you don't know where from, or from whom, or who did, or whatever. So there are phony documents out there, and I showed that a number of these MJ-12 documents were phony because of internal inconsistencies with reality. But you have to do your homework. You can't just look at it and say, oh, well, that's obviously a fraud, or that's obviously genuine. You got to follow it up. This is what irks me when people do their research by proclamation instead of investigation.
I know that's right. Now let's move to 1961 and one of the more famous cases in ufology, the Betty and Barney Hill case. For those who may not know, who were Betty and Barney Hill and what happened to them?
Well, okay. Betty Hill was a social worker in the state of New Hampshire. She had married, her second marriage was to Barney Hill, who was a black man who had been in the military during the war and who was working for the post office and was also on the Governor's Civil Rights Commission in New Hampshire. So it was an interracial couple. And in 1961, they had a strange experience. They were driving along, and they saw flashing light in the sky, and a UFO showed up, and, typical UFO sighting, if you will. They got out of the car, Barney got out of the car, and he had binoculars. He could see beings through the windows of this craft that was sitting less than 200 feet away or so, row of windows. And they get back in the car, and he tells Betty, we're going to be captured. That's why the book is called Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. He said that. So they drove off, and there was a period of mixed. They didn't know what went on, but they did know that they got home 2 hours later than they should have gotten home. This is in the middle of New Hampshire at night. There's no traffic. It's not like you're going around New York City or something, or even Boston. And they developed certain symptoms. Barney's ulcers started acting up and so forth. And eventually, he went to a doctor who suggested he see a psychiatrist because, back then it was thought that psychological things stimulate ulcers, if you will. And so they wound up, fortunately, with Dr. Benjamin Simon, who in World War II ran a hospital with 3,000 beds for shell-shock war veterans. That was the phrase that was used, not PTSD, which we sophisticated people today, Dr. Simon had developed techniques of using hypnosis to have people relive the terrible experience they'd had. For example, your buddy's head gets blown off next to you in battle. It's hard to, why him, not you, and it's messy. These are terrible experiences that people had. So Dr. Simon was a world-class expert. They didn't know anything about flying saucers, but he hypnotized them each separately. This went on for many weeks. They were admonished not to talk to each other about what was going on. They certainly didn't hear the tapes of the other one being hypnotized. And the story that comes out is that they drove off from this place. There were strange sounds in the car after seeing this saucer that was close. And there were beings in the road ahead. And it's kind of very dim, and they stopped the car, and what comes out under hypnosis, they were taken on board the craft. Didn't go anywhere, in the craft. Taken on board in separate rooms. It was catch and release program, if you will. They were examined, skin samples, hair samples, that sort of thing. And they were put back out and told they wouldn't remember what happened. Now, on board, they saw Betty is describing, and this must have shook up Dr. Simon, how they showed her, she asked them where they were from. Betty would ask anybody anything. Now, I did spend time with Betty, and I've written 3 books with her niece, Kathleen Martin, who heard about the case the day after it happened because Betty called Kathy's mother, her sister, and tell her about the sighting, but they didn't know about the abduction part of the experience then. I mean, sisters, you won't believe what happened to us last night. And we got home 2 hours later than we should have. Wow, this is weird. So Dr. Simon did an incredible job. This wasn't a parlor hypnotist, is what I'm saying. There's some medical ethics involved in here. They didn't want the story to go public at all. They gave talks after they got this experience out. And somebody broke the confidence and talked to a reporter, and he called them. He wanted to interview them and do a story for the newspaper, and they said, absolutely not. They thought they'd lose their jobs. And he did it anyway. And fortunately, the Boston Traveler was the newspaper. It got a good response. And so eventually a book came out by John Fuller, The Interrupted Journey, mid-'60s. This happened in 61, November 20th. And in 1966 or so, the book came out. And it was showed up in many countries. It was well done. Now, our book, Captured, comes out, that came out in the mid-'60s. We came out less than 10 years ago, like 50 years later. But it had all kinds of information that wasn't in the first book, understandably. Part of it was what were those stars in the map that Betty saw, this 3-dimensional model, whatever it is. And that's where I mentioned the Zeta Reticuli and stuff like that. And Betty, Barney died in 68, cerebral hemorrhage, same as his father had. Betty lived until age 80, in the 80, after 2000. And so I met with her at her home. Kathy, of course, grew up there, so to speak. And the story is important because of the people, because of Dr. Simon. And it's hard to explain some of the things about the star map, for example. It turns out, and people don't seem to realize this, the stars, the planets in our solar system are in a plane. Think of a pizza with pieces of pepperoni on it, as opposed to a loaf of raisin bread where the raisins are all over the place, 3-dimensional. Well, being in a plane means it's easy to travel as it happens. And many people don't realize that that's the way they are. And it turns out that Marjorie Fish, the woman who did all this star map work, she built more than 20 models, gradually eliminating stars that the experts said couldn't have planets, which is probably not true, but anyway. And so, fantastic job. They're all sun-like stars and the rest of that. It's exciting because it's objective. You can't mess with it. And I was asked by the head of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO. There were 2 major groups, APRO and NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and the head of APRO asked me if I would work with Marjorie. She wanted to talk to a scientist. So I had early access to her findings. I met with her and got Astronomy Magazine to do an article about her work, got more response than anything they'd ever published. They put out an original story by the editor of Astronomy Magazine, Terence Dickinson. And then they carried a number of letters from various and sundry people over the next year. And then they put out a 32-page full-color booklet, The Zeta Reticuli Incident. And they sold 10,000 copies immediately, which has never happened before for that kind of thing. And then Carl Sagan, whose name was on the front because one of the letters that was included was from him, his lawyer threatened to sue them. Now, I should mention here, Carl and I were classmates at the University of Chicago for 3 years. We're the same age. We grew up in adjacent towns in New Jersey. We didn't know each other until we met at the University of Chicago, but for 3 years we were in the same classes. And he wrote a strong letter, and the editor caved, or the publisher caved, not the editor. And they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I wound up with 16,000 copies of that 32-page full-color booklet. Got them at a good price, sold them all. People were interested, to say the least. It was well done. I didn't write it. I'm not taking credit for that. But I was so pleased that people responded to it very well. And so it was exciting, and it was objective, and it was careful. And the story, Betty, well respected in her community. Barney, well respected. As a matter of fact, they both attended the inauguration of Lyndon Johnson because they were the civil rights community and stuff like that. And remember, in the early 60s, in many states, they would have been breaking the law to sleep in the same hotel room, black and white. This is in the early 60s now. I'm not saying this is the case now. I don't think so.
Well, the Hill story is really a great story, and you did a fantastic job on it, by the way.
Well, Kathy did. She did most of the writing, and she'd been following it. She was trying to prove that maybe it wasn't true, because she typed all the transcripts of the hypnosis sessions. We wanted to be careful. You know, it was important. And so she's really done outstanding research on that and on the whole rest of the story. But and again, many people probably aren't aware, young people today, what a big thing it was for a black man and a white woman to be married.
Well, yes, and that just made it an even more complicated case, as one can possibly imagine. Now, I want to ask you about two more cases from the late 20th century.
Sure.
First, the Travis Walton case.
Yeah, it's a great case, and I heard about it. I visited Travis way back in the 70s. He was among a logging crew. They were in the mountains in Arizona, and they were finished for the day, and a UFO comes along. They spotted it, and Travis foolishly got out of the car. He was in the truck, really. He was in the front seat. There were 5 guys. And got out of it and went over toward this thing that was sitting over the woods. This was in the woods. I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere, boonies, if you will. And they shouted at him, "Come back, Travis!" He never did have a good reason for why he went out there. He was curious. And a blue beam came down, for want of a better way of describing it, and zapped him, and his body was thrown several feet. They took off in the truck. I mean, this is scary, you know. And then they go a certain distance, a couple miles, and they don't see the object, so they can't leave him there. They got to go back. They couldn't find him. Now, this is woods. I mean, a desert is a better word. We're not in the forest, a lot of heavy forest there at all. And so they go to the sheriff's office and they report Travis is missing. And a search was set up, and this got nationwide publicity, and these people took polygraph examinations because the first thought was, oh, they shot him. there was a dispute, and what the heck? They're out in the woods. So who's going to know? And 5 days later, Travis shows up. He'd been dropped off from the saucer, not from height. It was on the ground. And he was given a polygraph examination, which he passed. I saw him, one of the first people to interview Travis, and Mike Rogers, who was the crew chief. And I was quite favorably impressed. All the guys took polygraph examinations. I mean, you got a crazy story here, right? And probably a murder. People have had crazier stories to cover up murders, So the cops took it very seriously. And so when Travis came back, he was shocked. His brother was in the area and been looking for him, and he thought he'd only been gone a day or so. And his brother said, "Look at your beard." And he feels his beard's got a week's growth, So it's a long story. There's a excellent book by Travis Walton. He's still around. He makes the circuit from time to time. Great guy. And he was very pleased. We did a talk show together, and the host of the show naturally had Travis tell the story. Then he asked me, "So what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I had talked to Travis not too long after the event took place, talked to Mike Rogers. I'm satisfied that he's telling the truth, that he had the experience as he describes in the book." And Travis was very grateful, because when he'd been on Dr. J. Allen Hynek, it was asked the same sequence of questions. Hynek's answer was, "Well, I think he believes that he's telling the truth," which isn't the same as saying, "I believe he's telling the truth." And he was very grateful for that, because, nobody likes to be publicly rejected as being a liar, regardless of motivations or anything else. And it's a very good case. There's a movie, Fire in the Sky, which wasn't 100% accurate, but no movies are. What can I say?
No, that's right, but it is a good
Travis.
film.
Well, it tells the basic story, that's for sure. And I was Travis is a bright guy. People think, he's just a country hick. He's not a country hick. The fact that he worked in the forest doesn't mean he's a country hick, and he wasn't. And Mike Rogers, the crew chief, and of course these guys have been attacked. Class again was attacking them, and it's all made up stories and blah, blah, blah. But I recommend the movie Fire in the Sky and the book by Travis Walton, Walton. It's well worth reading.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And what I find interesting about the story is that Travis Walton and the group have passed multiple polygraphs over multiple years.
Yes. Well, yeah, this was such a good story that, of course, the skeptics jumped on it. We got to prove that it's phony, And so, yeah, there was more than one polygraph for most of the people. And the forest people got involved in this case, of course. And I'm satisfied, especially Mike Rogers stood to lose contracts. If it turned out he was making up a story like this, he was the crew chief, so to speak. He had everything to lose and nothing to gain. And also, one thing, Travis was living then in Snowflake, Arizona. So when I was there early on, I made a point of asking people in the community. In small towns, everybody knows everybody else. If you're a liar, people know you're a liar. You know what I mean? And so I couldn't find anybody saying that about Travis. Or Mike Rogers, the crew chief. So, it's easy to attack people. Oh, well, obviously they're lying because they're saying things I don't want to hear. But that's not the way to test for truth.
Yes. Now let's move to 1989 and the single reason why we know the phrase Area 51. On KLAS-TV in Las Vegas, journalist George Knapp interviewed a man who claimed that he had back-engineered alien spacecraft at a secret base in the Nevada desert. Now, we all know now that man was Bob Lazar. So,
yeah.
Stanton, what are your thoughts on Lazar and the story in general?
Well, I published some stuff about it. I got dragged into this. This is more than 20 years ago, as you just pointed out, because his claim was that he was a nuclear physicist, that he had received a master's degree in nuclear physics from MIT and a degree in electronics from Caltech. And that's two of the top technical colleges in the country, universities in the country. And he claimed that he worked on back engineering flying saucers at Area 51. And the reporter who carried the ball on that story was George Knapp, who I consider probably the finest journalist on UFOs in the country. And I've been on his show, and I have the greatest respect for George. Now, and so I was being asked about this case because I'm a nuclear physicist, and he was saying he was, and so forth. And so you get into all kinds of stuff, but I did a lot of checking. Again, I wanted to find out what's going on here. So I checked MIT. They never heard of him. I talked to 5 different people. Robert Scott Lazar. That's not like John Smith. You know, there weren't 27 different ones there. I checked with Caltech. They hadn't heard of him. Now, he is in the phone book, in one phone book at Los Alamos, but it doesn't say what he did. It says he worked at the Mason Accelerator Facility. There's a fancier name for it than that. But he was probably a technician because the big accelerator facilities, professors come from all over the country, but you can't bring your staff with you. It's a unique facility for certain kind of accelerated particles. But you can't, you need technicians. And so he did work there for a time, but it doesn't say he was a scientist. And then I was getting pushed, and he's believable, somebody said. And so I checked with George to find out Bob's high school in Westbury, New York. And so I called the high school. I said, I'm getting different stories on this individual, and I'd like to check. Well, call me back. I'll get his files. Okay, I called back, and I said, okay, he did go there. Yes, he graduated in August, though, not with his class. Well, that already raises some questions, because MIT requires the best records. And I know that because I was accepted there out of high school. I was valedictorian of my high school class, but I couldn't afford to go because MIT costs $900 a year for tuition. Now it's $27,000, I think. But you know, but and so I asked the gal I was talking to. Well, he did take a lot of science courses, didn't he? Chemistry. What else? Chemistry. Well, he was valedictorian, was he? Now, that was not fair on my part. He never said he was valedictorian. But I was valedictorian, and I was beginning to resent this, you know. And she laughed and said no. I said, well, was he in the top 10? No. Top 50? No. She's laughing some more. Top 100? No. He was like 265 out of 365. Bottom third of his class. Now, one of the people I talked to was the admissions office at MIT. And where do you have to rank in your class to get in? MIT is very competitive. All kinds of people from all over the world want to go there. Typically in the top 15%. And he was in the bottom third. It guarantees he didn't go to MIT. And so I did that kind of checking. Also, one of the things, it's a long, involved story, but one thing in particular, he said, they were using element 115 to make gravitational wave amplifiers, whatever they are supposed to be. Well, all the elements over 100 are radioactive. And 115, yes, it's been discovered. In an experiment that ran for weeks, they produced 4 atoms at a big accelerator. 4 atoms! And how many need to do anything useful? 10 followed by 23, 24 zeros, atoms, kind of thing. So it didn't check out. Let's put it that way. And George Knapp says he doesn't think Bob has those degrees either. But I figure once a guy's lied about something that he knows better than anybody, his own background, why should I believe him about anything, you know? It's kind of my thing. Well, more recently, a Dr. Krangle, who worked at Los Alamos and has a PhD from MIT, and he had seen Bob there, and he told people, well, looked like a physicist to me. He had a pocket protector. He was at a security briefing. Well, everybody who works at Los Alamos has to get a security clearance, I should say. Standard practice, because it's a very special place. There's lots of classified work going on there, like about nuclear weapons, stuff like that. And so I have written a couple of things in which I point out the discrepancies. And Bob said that they had 500 pounds of element 115. Well, it's got a half-life less than 3 minutes. And his answer to that was, well, they must have gotten it from some other star system. Well, the laws of physics seem to be the same everywhere. The farther out we are able to reach with our instruments, the more we find that Mother Nature's pretty consistent. So I don't buy the 500 pounds. I don't buy 5 pounds, for that matter. And so I have pointed out that I can't find any reason to say he's telling the truth. People checked the yearbooks at MIT and Caltech, couldn't find a sign of Bob in them or anybody. Where's his diplomas? A friend of his called and said, well, what would it take to convince you Bob's telling the truth? I said, well, I'd like to see diplomas. I'd like to see a resume, a list of his papers. And I sent him, I had an 8-page resume at that time. And I sent him a copy of my resume and copies of my diplomas. And do you know anybody who's got diplomas from a respectable institution like MIT or Caltech that has lost it? It's not too common, I would think. You'd be proud of it, And so it's a great story, and there are still people who believe everything Bob said. And I was there when he gave a presentation in Arizona at a conference. I had one phone conversation with him. We weren't screaming at each other. I just think he wasn't telling the truth.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I do believe the Bob Lazar story, though I also have some of the reservations that you have and that you've expressed here tonight. However, I have almost complete faith in George Knapp to the point that I really don't believe George would tie his credibility and his career to a guy who was faulty. And I know George did a lot of the due diligence on the story. As far as his high school work is concerned, I mean, Albert Einstein wasn't a great high school student either. But we do know that he did work at Los Alamos.
Briefly.
And, well, yes, and that means to me that he did go through some hiring process, a process which has to be more rigorous than your local Taco Bell, and he must have been at least decent at what he did.
He was a handy guy. There's no question. He's a bright guy. He built a jet-powered automobile.
Right. He did do that. And if there are discrepancies or even lies about his education, I think he probably got caught up in some situation where he found himself in a place where he wanted to belong. And coincidentally, a place where he had the skills to belong. But it's a place where everyone brandishes their degrees as a sign of competency. And he knew that he could do what they do, and he knew that he needed to get in to show that he could do what they do. So yes, maybe he did lie about his education in that world, and so that he could be in that world. But now there are some who will say, well, he lied once, he's a liar about the whole thing, and I would say maybe, and maybe not. I tend to believe that it was an insecurity play and sort of a last-ditch effort to get in and stay in. But again, I do wonder how he made it through what I suspect is a pretty difficult hiring process.
Not everybody tells the truth all the time. Look, I'll grant you it's fascinating, and I've written a couple articles about it. I say he's a bright guy, and I wish. I was looking for information to back up the story. If he had appeared in a yearbook at MIT or someplace, well, how could I argue with that? But the 500 pounds of element 115 really gets me.
Well, I would say that you're not altogether wrong, and there are still answers that need to be found about the Lazar story, but I still find it fascinating nonetheless, and as I said, I still believe George Knapp. Still in the 90s, it was when the government first talked about Roswell and talked about it pretty openly at a press conference, and they had basically said that everyone who had memories of the event are actually remembering the wrong year.
Well, that to me is an incredible claim for this reason. That I dug out, you'll get a kick out of this. I did a show before he was elected senator with Al Franken, a television show. He was on a committee, and he said, well, it couldn't have been an important story. After all, it only appeared in the Roswell paper. Well, I had sent the people at the station front pages from half a dozen major cities, Sacramento, Chicago, Spokane, several other cities, Los Angeles, and we have dates on those papers. The Roswell story is there. The cover-up, too. I mean, 2 days later, Army. But how could anybody say it's the wrong year? I can show you the papers from July 1947. So it sounds like a great argument until you look at the data.
Yes, absolutely ridiculous. You are correct. Now, no surprise to anyone, I'm sure, I was a big fan of Art Bell in the 1990s as well.
I did a show many times.
Right, and it seems like every year on Coast to Coast AM, Art Bell and George Norrie would have one of the various UFO representatives on the show, and they'd all say something akin to, this upcoming year will be a monumental year for UFO research. This will be the year for disclosure. Yet, as we know, that has never really come to pass. Were you ever optimistic that that would be the case, that would be correct? And what do you think about disclosure now?
Yeah. How many times have you heard that? Well, I'll tell you. Just today, I watched Tom DeLonge's piece. There's a To the Stars, I think is the name of it. To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. And he's got the government people. There's a whole book about the secret, S-E-K-R-E-T. And Tom was with the Blink music group. Now, it's not my kind of music, so I didn't really know about him, but I understand he was quite a guy. And I watched him today with 5 government people who were very impressive. I mean, the story is that Tom managed to talk to all kinds of people, and they've told him that there's stuff really going on. So today's program got me excited that maybe, because I was impressed with the people who were on the show, maybe something is going to happen. Because these guys had high-sounding positions, and they were retired now. This is not current, so they could get away, maybe, they think, with saying stuff. You see, there's a tricky situation here in timing. If the government can't really call you a liar, if you're active and been involved and you've got credentials and all the rest of that, and if they try to demolish you, they're just sticking their foot in the fire. You know what I mean? And people show that, well, I can prove that I got a PhD, somebody says. Here, look at it. So you got to be very careful about debunking stories because you're vulnerable. When somebody pulls the right information out, whoops, gee whiz, that's not true. I was wrong. So I'm getting to be more and more optimistic because of what I saw today, for one thing, and also because of this business that we now have so much more information indicating that there are planets all over the place. I mean, if you say there's only 8,000, like Frank Drake, in a whole galaxy, gee, that's pretty few and far between. What are they doing here? All that sort of thing. If you say that within a mere 100 light years there's between 10 and 16,000 planets, that changes the picture entirely. Then it becomes less likely that this isn't true. And when you add into the picture, back in the mid-1600s, the bishops were trying to figure out how old the Earth was. And they were sex addicts, you might say, because they looked through all the begats in the Bible, starting way back when. And when you figure that out, the world was created in 4004 BC. I think it was a Thursday afternoon. And they left out 6 zeros, unfortunately. And the important factor I'm getting at here is the planet is at least 4+ billion years old. We only know about technology and advancement and stuff for the last few thousand years, don't we? We don't know how many times there have been other civilizations come and go, and asteroids hitting the place. And so I think our perspective about how important we are, would you believe, has decreased a bit. And suddenly we realize, hey, there's probably life all over the place. I heard a number the other day that there may be 100 billion planets in our galaxy. There's 200 billion stars, so that wouldn't be a far out number. So that's very different from 8,000.
Stanton Friedman, you have done some impressive and important work over the years, and we'll have links to that work on MidnightRiderNews.com.
Good.
But if there's anyone out there who's interested in UFOs and ufology and just doesn't know where they can begin, other than your own work, where should they begin?
Well, Kathleen Marden's done a couple of books, besides the 3 we've done together. But Dr. Bruce Maccabee is an optical physicist, worked for a Navy research lab for over 30 years. He's done a couple of books. He was the first to get the FBI to release loads of UFO documents. He filed under Freedom of Information. He was totally astonished when he got, loads of documents. What? Where'd they come from? Bruce is a top-notch researcher. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, Maccabee, and he's got books. Look him up on the internet. Another one that I like is a book about the UFO case at Aztec, New Mexico. And the author is Scott Ramsey and his wife, Suzanne. And it's something, I'm looking for my form right here that's got the exact title of the book. The Aztec UFO Incident. It's from 2016. Scott Ramsey, R-A-M-S-E-Y, and Suzanne, S-U-Z-A-N-N-E. Aztec is in the northwest corner of New Mexico. And Suzanne's family lives in that area, so when they do their research, they have a place to stay, and they've done an incredible job of digging out the goodies. And so I highly recommend that book. There are some DVDs. There's a list of stuff at my website, and there are some debates around. There's Are Flying Saucers Real is a DVD. This is at my website. It's listed with 19 other items or so. And Are Flying Saucers Real? And the debate was between myself and retired United States Air Force Officer Major James Magaha. Sharp guy. This was at Middle Tennessee State University, and there was a question and answer period and so forth. They didn't take a vote as to who won, but it gives you a chance to look at a formal debate and with two guys giving each other a hard time, if you will.
So if there's anyone out there who would like to follow you or would like to know more about your work, where can they go?
www.stantonfriedman.com. Friedman. And you'll get loads of hits with me on the web, but that lists my books and events coming up and stuff like that, and just changing the events. But they'll find papers by me, articles by me. You got to spell my name right, but I'm not rare, and you don't need to worry about there being lots of Stanton Friedman, so you got to get the right one.
Well, there is only one Stanton Friedman, and I'm glad we had you here tonight. It was a great show.
Good.
And I just want to say that this is everything we hoped it would be and more. I mean, UFOs are such an exciting topic.
What could be more exciting?
Right. Well, thank you for being on, and we hope to have you on again very soon.
I hope so. I enjoy doing radio. As I said, I don't need to put on a tie. I've done shows in my pajamas, as a matter of fact.
I guess that's true. Thank you so much for being with us, Stanton.
Thank you.
I'm S.T. Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show, and we'll be right back. a first-generation researcher into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the author of High Treason, Killing of a President and Absolute Truth. Robert Groden joined us to discuss Oswald, Altkins, Zapruder, Stone, and so much more.
Hi, this is Robert Groden, author of High Treason and the Killing of a President. For more on the assassination of John F. Kennedy, download episode 31 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
UFOs are both an interesting and controversial topic. Some people are believers, some are skeptics, and some are in between, which, as usual, is the safe position. It allows you to believe in unidentified flying objects, but the belief can stop at aliens. Again, it's very safe. When I see a UFO story, I look at it a bit differently. I usually don't place the story in the real or hoax box. I usually see the story as examples of both media bias and public media consumption. When the mainstream mass media uses phrases like a spokesman for the Attorney General said, or White House Communications Director said, we believe what is said is truth. Now, I know, some of you are out there saying, yes, other people do. Other people absolutely believe that, but I don't. Well, the problem with that is that we do, and that is subconscious. Those who detest the mainstream media still prove that something happened by affirming that they, quote, saw it on the news, quote. But still, and here's where the contradiction exists, polling suggests that Americans trust neither the news media nor their politicians. So how do we explain that? And how do we explain that we trust public officials more than a truck driver, a flight attendant, or a grandmother in a trailer park? What makes an official more trustworthy than an average person? Like it or not, we still subconsciously respect those who we believe have power over us. It's in our nature. It's in our sociologic DNA. But we need to tear down that subconscious intellectual reflex. We need to believe in our neighbors more than we believe in our leaders. If there is any humanity left to believe in, we need to find it. We need to seek it like we seek entertainment, fast food, and the newest version of our smartphone. If a politician says something is true, it doesn't mean that it is. If they say it isn't true, it doesn't mean that it isn't. We need to deprive the establishment of our trust, our belief, and even our respect when necessary. It's misplaced dependency. The power should be within yourself, your family, your friends, and your neighbors. Tonight is the night to begin breaking the walls down. Not literal walls, but the walls of your mind, the walls of belief that have been built into you since childhood. Start asking why. Why do I believe what I do? Why do I believe in someone? Why don't I believe in someone? And where did it all begin? And maybe more importantly, where does this end? As the year comes to a close, remember that we celebrate the new year because it is a rebirth of sorts. It's a second chance. So make it one. Make 2018 your year. Learn more than you have ever learned. Care more than you have ever cared, and be more than you've ever wanted to be. You are more important than any politician, public figure, trendsetter, or supposed expert. Have a great year. But more importantly, have a vital year. From the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace.
The Midnight Rider News Show with St. Patrick is a production of MidnightRiderNews.com. Copyright belongs to St. Patrick and all rights reserved. You can email us at midnightridernews@gmail.com. And be sure to visit MidnightRiderNews.com for the best in alternative historical analysis. This is Leanne saying thank you for listening, have a great night, and always remember, when life throws you lemons, throw them back into man chocolate.